board as soon as she had anchored.
With all of the South's major ports blockaded, Mobile became even more important to the Confederacy. The two forts at the mouth of Mobile Bay kept blockading ships out of the bay and away from Mobile. That gave swift blockade runners room in which to slip into and out of Mobile.
And once the blockade runners were able to get inside the bay, then they were protected completely from the Union blockaders.
The forts were pretty formidable in themselves, but the Confederates set about making it even tougher to sail into the bay. They put a line of obstructions across the mouth of the bay and added a field of floating mines, then called torpedoes. They left just a narrow channel right underneath the guns at Fort Morgan.
Fort Morgan was more complete than most. It was designed for 32-pounder guns. They mounted larger guns, 8-inch guns, 10-inch guns. They built water batteries, which was the most powerful battery, was built outside of the fort. It was a dirt battery built down closer to the water. That was their principal and most powerful battery.
With the port of Mobile all but shut down to normal traffic, Mobile Bay ball pilots and steamboat captains had to find another way to make a living. Many of them turned to blockade running. The ship's captain, John Maffitt, decided he had to make a run into the bay, Yankee blockaders or not.
It was an act of desperation on the part of Maffitt. The captain, with practically no crew, what could he do? He had to get somewhere where he was in a friendly port and could be taken care of.
Captain Maffitt, as a ruse, ran up the English flag and headed for the Union flagship at full speed. When the Union vessels discovered the ruse, it was too late. But they went ahead and opened a murderous fire on the Florida, causing considerable damage and some casualties. Maffitt then hauled down the English colors, ran up the Confederate colors, and continued right into the bay.
The captain of the USS Oneida later wrote in his report to his superiors,
"We continued firing at him, assisted by the Winona and one of the motor schooners. But he made sail, and by his superior speed and unparalleled audacity, managed to escape us."
The Florida put in for repairs near Bon Secours. Hundreds of Mobilians made the trip across the bay to see the famous ship. While she was being repaired, the Florida was painted gray. Blockade runners had found that color was hard for Federal ships to spot, especially at night. Farragut had 4 ironclads to go along with his 14 wooden warships. The stage was set. It was the most powerful fleet ever assembled for a single naval action. The Union fleet was equal in the weight of its guns to the combined British, French, and Spanish fleets that fought at the Battle of Trafalgar. Private Charles Brother, on board Farragut's flagship, made this journal entry on August 4th.
The report is that we are going to fight tomorrow morning. Guess we are. God grant that we may have good luck.
At 6:30 on the morning of August the 5th, the Union fleet got underway. Before setting out, Farragut had ordered his ships tied together, 2 by 2. Each sloop of war lashed to a smaller gunboat.
And he did this for 3 reasons. Number one, if one vessel got disabled, the other one could pull it through. Number two, the lighter gunboats, being on the outside, were protected from the fire of Fort Morgan. And number three, with 2 vessels lashed together, you had the same maneuverability as if you had 2 screws.
At about 10 after 7, the guns of Fort Morgan opened fire on the approaching ship. The roar quickly became deafening. It could be heard in Mobile, 30 miles to the north. Alarm bells spread the word of the attack. Frances James, who was a young girl at the time, later recalled the ringing bells creating pandemonium in the streets of Mobile.
Everybody seemed to have lost their heads. Confederate officers, of whom there seemed to be a good many, were trying to form squads of men, trying to drill them. Horsemen were galloping up and down the street.
As the fleet came in close to the fort, there was a terrible explosion. The first Union ironclad in line, the Tecumseh, hit a torpedo. The explosion threw the stern of the heavy ship into the air, and the ironclad sank in less than 3 minutes.
When the Tecumseh was sinking, Commander Craven and his pilot, John Collins, met at the small hatchway leading out of the pilot house down into the turret. Collins stepped back and said, "You first, sir." Craven said, "No, after you, pilot. I leave my ship last." Collins was able to go down and escape. He was rescued. Craven, however, didn't make it, and he went down together with 93 of the crew.
The sinking ship created confusion in the Federal fleet. The first wooden ship in line, the Brooklyn, stopped and began backing up. The channel was blocked by the sinking Tecumseh, and the captain now knew for certain the torpedoes worked. It was at this point of mass confusion that Admiral Davy Farragut supposedly gave his world-famous command, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." However, many authorities now doubt he ever spoke those words. As the battle had intensified, the smoke had become thick. So thick, Farragut climbed up into the rigging of his ship in order to see over it. That put Farragut at least 30 feet above the deck. The Hartford's pilot, Morgan Freeman, was perched just above Farragut. He was in the maintop with a speaking tube, allowing him to talk with the engine room. He was probably the only person close enough to hear anything Farragut said, especially over the roar of the battle.
Farragut asked Martin Freeman, "Do we have enough depth to pass the Brooklyn on her port side?" And Freeman answered, "Plenty to spare, sir," or something to that effect. And Farragut said, "Go on."
Private Charles' brother was the person on deck who was closest to Farragut. Years later, he wrote,
"I did not hear any such cry, though I was on deck and near the Admiral at the time."
Yes, there's some historical controversy as to whether he said it or didn't say it. I don't know whether he did or did not, but he certainly did disregard the torpedoes and did go full speed ahead.
There were reports from more than one ship of musket fire, which in effect were the caps, the fuses on these torpedoes striking the bottom of the ships and exploding. And the fuses exploded. The fuses which ignited, was supposed to ignite the powder in the torpedoes, ignited, but the powder was apparently water-soaked.
I dashed ahead with the Hartford, and the other ships followed, their officers believing they were going to a noble death with their commander-in-chief. We steamed between the buoys where the torpedoes were. Believing from having been so long in the water they were probably innocuous, I determined to take a chance on their explosion.
as the Federal ships passed the fort, the battle got even hotter. The Tennessee and her 3 small gunboats attacked the Union ships. And of course, the guns of Fort Morgan were putting out a murderous fire.
One of the participants in the Battle of Mobile Bay described what it was like to be fired at by a big 120-pound boat. And he said, you first see the puff of white smoke, and then you hear the report. And about that time, you see this boat coming at you, getting bigger and bigger all the time, sounding like 1,000 devils wailing. The old sailors, of course, knew that if you saw a projectile, it wouldn't hit you. It was the ones that you didn't see that you had to worry about. Of course, they didn't tell this to the young recruits, and they got a big kick out of watching them dancing around, trying to dodge these shells.
The 3 small wooden gunboats accompanying the Tennessee couldn't do much against a huge Federal fleet. The Morgan fled back to Mobile. The Gaines was run aground and burned, and the Selma was captured by the Metacomet.
When Lieutenant Pat Murphy surrendered to Selma to his pre-war friend, Lieutenant Commander Jim Jewett, commander of the Metacomet, Murphy said to Jewett, "Captain Jewett, the fortunes of war compel me to tender you my sword." And Jewett, in an informal and friendly way, said, "Pat, don't make a damn fool of yourself." He said, "I've had a bottle on ice for you for half an hour."
John O'Connell wrote that his ship, the Tennessee, was just too slow to prevent the Union ships from running into the bay.
The shot and shell fell fast on our shield without doing much damage. The enemy fleet succeeded in getting by. We tried to run into some of their ships, but could not on account of our speed. They would run by as soon as they would see us running at them.
However, Admiral Buchanan would not give up the fight. He ordered the Tennessee to pursue the entire Union fleet. When the fleet anchored 3 miles into the bay, Buchanan ordered the attack. 1 ship against 17.
The monitors and wooden vessels best adapted were ordered to attack the ram, not only with guns, but with bows at full speed. Then began one of the fiercest naval combats on record.
It was the warmest place I ever got into. The enemy fought gallantly. Their ships ran into us twice without damage to us, but much to themselves.
The Tennessee's guns were creating havoc among Farragut's wooden ships and their crews.
Boy Clark had both legs taken off. He lived only a short time. Alexander lost both legs and both arms and died shortly. Very few were slightly wounded. All were killed or horribly mangled. The cockpit looked more like a slaughterhouse than anything else.
The battle was at point-blank range. The Union ships swarmed around the Tennessee.
The Hartford and the Tennessee contact, actually so close they couldn't fire their guns. They were muzzle to muzzle. The gun crews swore at each other, and in one case, supposedly threw a spittoon through an open gun port. And so the Battle of Mobile Bay was fought partly with spittoons.
In the end, the Tennessee steering chain and smokestack was shot away. She was unable to maneuver and was filled with smoke. The crew couldn't see. Admiral Buchanan finally gave the order that ended the greatest naval battle of the Civil War and one of the most important in history.
It ushered in the era of modern naval warfare. It forever relegated the wooden ship to museums, the wooden man of war to museums.
The Union suffered 220 casualties in the battle, the South 30. One of the Confederate dead was the executive officer on board the CSS Selma, Lieutenant John Comstock. He was a young man who was engaged to Mary Horton. Her father sent word of the loss to Mary's mother, who was staying inland with relatives.
On entering the house, I found Mary groaning in agony, the girls weeping. Never have I seen such grief in our family. Mary got the news just before I got to the house. In a letter Mary received from Lieutenant Comstock the night before the engagement, it was madness for our little Navy to go in an engagement with Federal vessels.
Within 3 weeks, the Union Army had captured all 3 of the forts guarding the entrance to Mobile Bay. Fort Morgan held out the longest, enduring a bombardment so fierce the Confederate defenders had to throw their powder into the cisterns to keep it from exploding. With the fall of the forts, Mobile Bay was under Union control, but the Federal Navy would spend another 8 months removing obstructions and torpedoes from the upper bay, trying to get at Mobile itself. 7 ships were sunk by exploding torpedoes, proving that the concept of floating mines was a good one.
The Milwaukee and the Osage were sunk in the upper bay in March of 1865. There were a number of other smaller vessels that were sunk in Mobile Bay. So Farragut was very lucky. That's the only thing you can say, that one of them did not explode under the Hartford.
Once the channels were cleared, a huge federal army of 45,000 men began the final push to take Mobile. The Yankees attacked forts on the eastern shore of the bay at Spanish Fort and Blakely.
Today, the enemy commenced operations by an attack on Spanish Fort, where some of our best troops under General Gibson were stationed. The firing was heavy and continuous, while the booming of heavy artillery was heard distinctly on this side, rendering us very uneasy as to the fate of our brave and gallant boys stationed in and around the fort. Being unaccustomed to such heavy firing, we were much startled and excited until we gradually became used to the sound.
Spanish Fort fell on April 8th, Blakely the next day. The same day, Lee surrendered at Appomattox. From there, the Confederate Army was in full retreat, fleeing into Mobile and leaving it an open city on the 11th. The city's slaves, sensing freedom was close in hand, staged a minor uprising before the Union Army moved into Mobile the next day.
They were just adrift in the city. There were no provisions for taking care of them. And so when the Confederates withdrew, law and order just broke down. And they rampaged, they looted. But that sort of thing could be expected. I mean, they were in a very, very strange situation. And so it was bad for a few days.
On April 12th, Mobile surrendered. Mobile teenager Willie Fulton wrote to his sister, who was staying at a plantation upstate.
The last of the Confederate Army left the city before daybreak this morning, followed by all the steamboats, including the blockade runners and gunboats, which brought up the rear. The garrisons of Battery Hugie and Battery Tracy escaped with the rest. About 11 o'clock, we had Slough, Calais Price, and Dr. Ketchum went in a carriage with the white flag to meet the Yankees, who were landing troops at the lower toll gate on Bay Road, and to negotiate the terms of surrender.